If a parent came into my doctor's office, I would not recommend that their child drink this for lunch. But I also wouldn't recommend that they drink this, or even something like this. In fact, I wouldn't recommend anybody just drink hydration electrolyte beverages for the heck of it. We've become so obsessed with shoving electrolytes down people's throats, and it's time to talk about it. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer. My goal in this channel is to teach you about the medical side of the sports world, and that includes the current topic with these hydration drinks. Now, all of this is being spurned because of Logan Paul, Mr. Beast, and KSI launching their new food, Lunchly. I think I'm saying it right. After Logan shared this image highlighting the nutritional contents and specifically calling out electrolytes compared to a Lunchable and how much better it was with all these electrolytes, I made this little joke about sodium getting rebranded as electrolytes because that's really what's happened. We've taken things like sodium, potassium that historically have been thought of in a very respectable fashion, something you have to do respectable amounts of and be cautious with, is now just considered electrolytes, and it's this big, positive, amazing thing all the time. Logan seemed to take offense to my tweet here, calling me a sports medicine doctor, saying that I can't tell the difference between sodium and potassium. Logan, I assure you, I can. I understand the basics of hydration here, and we're gonna talk about it and dive into this and just my opinion, and not my opinion, but the science on what the deal is with this. And then Mr. Beast, this was something that he posted on his account, and this is really the highlight, the crux of this. More electrolytes, Lunchables, yes, hundreds of millions of units, their product, 80 less calories, 60% less sugar, more electrolytes. So they're advertising that more electrolytes are good. And that is the fundamental problem here, and the lack of misunderstanding with electrolytes and hydration that has frankly gotten out of control with just this electrolyte hydration beverage market. Yes, there's no doubt that our bodies need proper amounts of electrolytes to function. Electrolytes are crucial. Things like sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, magnesium, for the function of literally almost everything in our body, muscles, nerves. You have to have proper levels of all those electrolytes. If they become too high, you have problems. If they become too low, you have problems. Generally speaking, our bodies do a very, very good job of managing the proper balance of electrolytes. We shouldn't have to rely on external supplementation of electrolytes beyond our food for just normal daily healthy function. And that's part of my initial argument here. You don't need to drink electrolyte drinks just as part of daily life. There is no reason that you should be consuming Gatorade, Liquid IV, Prime, Body Armor, any of these electrolyte drinks. They're not necessary for your average, regular, healthy person to just sit and have for lunch, dinner, breakfast, or as a snack. I'm not a hypocrite though. I've had my fair share of these at times with meals, but I'm saying when you're trying to advertise and market it as something that is like okay or better to have a bunch of electrolytes, that's where I think you have to be really careful and make sure people have the right impression. If we look at the ingredients label here for Prime, just for example, they advertise on the side of the bottle that there are 834 milligrams of electrolytes. But what does that mean? It's primarily potassium. It's, if you look at here, 700 milligrams of potassium, 124 milligrams of magnesium, and only 10 milligrams of sodium, which is going to be extremely important for when we talk about the actual purpose and the actual value of these electrolyte hydration beverages. This is essentially a lot of potassium. It's basically flavored coconut water. That's the number 2 ingredient, is coconut water, and that's where you get a lot of that potassium. So yes, it has a lot of electrolytes, but is that good? What does that mean? Are they the right electrolytes? Are they too many? Are they too few? And when's the right time to consume them? If we compare to, the granddaddy of them all, electrolyte drinks here, Gatorade, which again, I'm not saying Gatorade is any better in these circumstances. The one improvement that I think with Gatorade is that it has more sodium, 270 milligrams of sodium compared to 10 with Prime. Now, Gatorade also has sugar, but sugar is important when it comes to hydration because our body cells actually uptake more water and these electrolytes whenever sugar is along for the ride with this co-transport. So you actually want some sugar in your beverage when you're trying to aggressively rehydrate. So just because Gatorade has sugar doesn't mean that like Gatorade is bad, but we all consider Gatorade as bad because it has calories and sugar, whereas something like Prime is marketed as great and good because it has all these chock full electrolytes, more than Gatorade, but no sugar. That's not as simple as it really is. You look at other things out there on the market. So Element, which full disclosure, I've done some sponsored ads for Element in the past. I think it's a great product, especially for those high intense sweating exercise bouts that we'll talk about later. But Element, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 of magnesium. So you compare that with Prime. Now, both of these are considering themselves to be hydration, electrolyte drinks in that space. One has 10 milligrams of sodium, one has 1,000 milligrams of sodium. One has 700 of potassium, 200 of potassium. When you have such extremes in what is being found in these beverages, you have to question what is actually appropriate and what is necessary at the right time. I have no problem whatsoever if Prime and these other drinks, but Prime especially with their marketing we'll talk about, was being marketed as just a low-calorie, tasty coconut water. That's what it is. That's essentially what this is. And if it was marketed as such, I don't think there would be a lot of pushback and criticism. The challenge is that it's marketed with professional elite athletes consuming it as this optimal hydration electrolyte beverage that is good for you when you're exercising, good for your health, good for your hydration. And so they're advertising it like it has these benefits with hydration that simply don't hold up when you look at the science based on the actual electrolyte composition. Now, that doesn't mean that something like Gatorade is 100% perfect either, but the specific thing with Prime is that it doesn't have the amount of sodium that you need for optimal hydration, specifically with sweat loss. And so it's really important to distinguish the different scenarios where people are consuming these beverages. Again, I don't think there's a reason that anybody should be consuming these beverages for like the health benefits necessarily just at lunch or breakfast or when you're not exercising and exerting yourself or trying to replenish because of true dehydration. We've lost this sort of edge between what we think is optimal hydration and true dehydration, where people think that you have to just chug and pound electrolytes and water to stay healthy, but that's not necessarily the case. Like I said, a lot of people, our bodies do a very good job of managing our sodium, our potassium, our chloride, our electrolytes without this need for external supplementation. The need for external supplementation comes into effect whenever our body is losing excessive amounts of these electrolytes that we're not adequately able to replace through food and diet alone. That's what these electrolyte drinks are from. That's why Gatorade was developed, to replenish the salt lost in sweat in those hot summer days down in Florida. Now, the average person, when they exercise and sweat, the number one electrolyte that you're losing is sodium chloride specifically. That's what gives it that salty taste. You're not losing a lot of potassium in your sweat. It's primarily salt. And it's varied from one person to the other, but on average, you lose around 900 to 950 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. And some people, depending on the intensity of their exercise, may lose multiple liters of sweat. So you could potentially be losing multiple grams of sodium if you are excessively sweating with exercise. So then you think, well, how am I going to replace that sodium? And that's where these electrolyte and sports drinks, hydration drinks, come into play. And so you would think you want to have a lot of sodium to replace that potentially 1, 2, 3 grams of sodium that are lost. And that's why these drinks historically have salt. That's why Gatorade, when you look at just your standard, this is not the low calorie, the electrolyte Gatorade, 270 milligrams, not as high as something like Element, which is going to have 1,000 milligrams of sodium, but at least there is sodium compared to the 10 milligrams found in this blue raspberry bottle of Prime. Simply put, drinking Prime, if you're excessively sweating to try and replenish your sodium, is not going to adequately replenish your sodium compared to a different beverage. This Body Armor Light is the same way though, to be honest. It's only got 20 milligrams of sodium, so twice the sodium of Prime. And the reason these drinks don't have a lot of sodium in them is because, of course, that makes it not taste very good. If you've ever had Element, I think Element is one of the best things you can have for really heavy sweat loss and replacing your electrolytes. It tastes salty, but guess what? When you're excessively losing sweat, you need to replenish that salt. So I have a really hard time believing that when we see that drinks like Prime are being marketed as the official sponsors of things like UFC, professional soccer, football clubs, elite athletes, I would hope that those elite athletes are not actually relying on something like Prime to replenish their electrolytes with exercise. Because again, while it's not in and of itself a bad beverage, I'm not saying it's like gonna cause all this harm and is some terrible drink, it doesn't have the adequate sodium that is necessary in those high-level sports excessive sweating scenarios to adequately replenish it. And so it sends this kind of mixed message with what you truly need in your electrolyte drink compared to what your body is losing and what is in your electrolyte drink. Now, let's talk a little bit next about the sugar, because if you actually look at some really well-founded science, there is something called an oral rehydration solution. Oral rehydration therapies were developed with the World Health Organization to specifically replenish fluid and electrolytes lost primarily in cases of diarrhea, where when you have excessive diarrhea, your gut is not able to reuptake the sodium in the water effectively, and so you can die from dehydration. This oral rehydration therapy is a solution of sugar and salt that's specifically measured to give the optimal concentration of really maximizing what your gut can reuptake into its cells to really rapidly work on good hydration in places where you might not be able to put in IVs. A lot of the drinks out there will actually base their formulas on this oral rehydration formula, this recipe, because it's been shown in literature time and time again to be a very good and effective way of successfully trying to orally rehydrate somebody that is having severe dehydration. Now, this is not, again, something that you should go like drink for lunch, but this is what is going to be recommended in those severe cases of true dehydration, electrolyte loss, where it could be very harmful and potentially fatal. And so you can make these. I think actually, I want to say that Liquid IV is fairly similar to this. You know, they've got a picture here of Drip Drop. And so there are a lot of commercially available oral rehydration solutions out there, and they have sugar, they have salt, because in order for your cells in your intestine to uptake more water, uptake more salt, there's actually a co-transporter with glucose. So having glucose on board physiologically helps your body reuptake more fluid and more of that salt. And so that's why you want sugar in there, because that helps with reabsorption. So if I'm going to drink something optimal, I want a little bit of sugar in there because I want to help support that co-transport of salt, water, sugar to get more optimal rehydration. So I'd actually argue that sometimes having some sugar is good in those situations of trying to really aggressively rehydrate. So we've just like all kind of lost our way with electrolytes, right? We all think that because of this marketing that like more electrolytes are good, right? Mr. Beast tweet, it's got more electrolytes, and so somehow that implies that it's better. But for a product that is intended to be eaten for lunch, there is no reason that the average kid that's going to eat a Lunchly needs to have more electrolytes. But that's used as like this marketing point to try and sell more of it because we think that more is better. But I'm here to tell you that in those cases, you don't need a bunch of electrolytes. Now, I will admit, if your choices are to either drink a Capri Sun or to drink a Prime, it's probably better to drink a Prime. But ideally, I'd rather you drink neither of them and drink a water. So yeah, you can argue that it's a healthier option than drinking a Capri Sun, but that doesn't mean that it's healthy, and there's not something that I think is just as good, cheaper, and better for your body, which for those situations for lunch, just drink water. If you want to talk about what to drink with excessive sweat loss in those situations of intense sport where you're out in the heat, where you're sweating, where you legitimately should have and want an electrolyte replacement beverage, make sure you're consuming something with salt. Salt is important. Salt is what you're going to be losing. There are a lot of different things out there to look at. Element, Body Armor, Gatorade, Prime, we'll put it in there. But it's important because of what your body loses in your sweat that you are making sure you replenish your salt. Yes, salt tastes salty. It's not going to be as delicious of a drink, but it's necessary to replenish that salt when you are losing a lot with sweating. It's also good to have some sugar in there because that sugar is going to help with reuptake of that water. It's going to have that co-transport with the sodium, which helps pull the water in behind it. Hydration is not that complicated. We've made it so complicated with all these different brands and products and drinks and electrolyte counts and this and that. If you're thirsty, drink water. Eat a well-balanced diet of food. Your body will do a just fine job of managing its electrolytes unless you have a true underlying health problem. If you're exercising, you're excessively sweating, then I think it's okay to drink a well-rounded electrolyte sports beverage that you enjoy the taste of, preferably something with some sodium. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know any questions or comments down below. Your thoughts. I'm not gonna lie, like I tasted it. The blue raspberry tastes pretty good. My wife tasted it. She thought it tasted delicious as well. So again, I'm not trying to say that it's like a bad, harmful drink. I don't think it's causing harm. I don't think it's bad, but I think it's been marketed in a way that gives people an impression that it's really, really good for hydration and or should be consumed at any other time of the day, like at lunch, which any, I think, sensible doctor, medical professional would say is not the case. And also just think of this. Do you really think that the same beverage that should be used to hydrate elite mixed martial art UFC fighters training and sweating for hours is what you should drink at lunch when you're not sweating? And I think if you think about that, you'll realize that those are very different scenarios that should have very different hydration. And trying to market one thing as being applicable to all that is not good.